Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another episode of an Evolved Review. I am James Caleb Kitchens, and I am joined today by, as always, by my co-host Caleb Stovall. How's it going, Caleb?
Hey, what's going on, man? Just another day.
That's right, another day in quarantine land. Uh, it's crazy, we started this in the quarantine, and it's still going on. Uh, well, we're joined today by a very special guest, ladies and gentlemen. He has 27 years in the wrestling business.
Oh my God.
He is a YouTube personality. He has shows such as Full Disclosure and news and commentary and a ton of other programs on his YouTube channel. You can catch him on YouTube. Just look up Stephen Platinum. Stephen Platinum, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, James Caleb Kitchens? And I think this is the first time I'm meeting Caleb. It's very nice to meet you. I'm very glad to be here, especially with what we're talking about. Oh my God.
You picked a
So,
fun episode. We talked about letting our guests kind of pick their episodes typically, and yeah, you definitely landed on a good one here.
Yes.
yes, I think Herb Abrams, there's a Herb Abrams that lives in every wrestling promoter, whether they want to admit it or not. So that's why I definitely wanted Herb Abrams.
Yeah, it's so cat's out of the bag. That we're definitely covering the Herb Abrams and the UWF, the dark side of the ring. Very appropriately named the episode "Cocaine and Cowboy Boots,"
Mm.
which tells you all you need to know about it. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, Google Dark Side of the Ring. You could find it Hulu, Google Play, YouTube, anywhere. Go catch the episode. You'll definitely enjoy it, and then come back and watch this episode as we kind of talk about the events of it here.
Absolutely. One thing I liked, I thought this was the last. I enjoyed the Road Warriors episode, but I thought that they did a couple of things in there that I thought were a little sketchy, where they were trying to frame the narrative too much with the clips that they were showing and selecting. But the Herb Abrams thing, I, they were struggling just to sort of capture how insane the whole thing was, and I thought they did a very good job of that. Just it's it's so pro wrestling. Like this only happens on in this way in the pro wrestling business. That's why I thought it was just a great one to have as part of the series.
Yeah, nobody
Yeah.
could start a basketball league in this fashion, or something like that. It's like this is wrestling. It's
We're
like,
trying to start a football league.
well, I guess you could start a football league this way, huh? Uh, womp womp twice. You could do it twice.
I know, right?
Uh, uh, but yeah, I mean, so let's get into it, guys. So you know, as far as the UWF goes, it started in 1990. So, that's definitely kind of all in all of our wheelhouse as far
Yeah.
as, wrestling being a major thing on a national scene too. Um, Steve, what did you think about UWF when it first kind of came out and that, this was going to be a thing?
The timing of UWF is very strange in my life because I was 18. I was just about to graduate from high school, and I just had my first interaction with pro wrestling. I used to go to Polynesian wrestling. I grew up in Hawaii, and um, we were screwing around in the ring after a Polynesian wrestling show. My friend Scott Tong and I, and we didn't call it backyard wrestling. We called it, friends fucking around, right? So when we finally got to touch a wrestling ring, we were excited. So he threw me to the corner. So I flare flipped in the corner, landed on my feet, ran across, and then my friend Scott Tong hit me. I took a bump like an idiot on the apron and then bounced off. And the guy who was in charge, who's Lars Anderson, who wasn't really an Anderson but said he was an Anderson, he came over and offered to train me and my friend. He's just like, if you guys are gonna do this stuff, like, let's train you. And I was excited, but my parents shot it down immediately. But I remember the UWF becoming a thing, and we bought all the wrestling magazines, and we even I think we even subscribed to the Observer then.
Oh
So
man.
I was pretty familiar with the UWF, and we got everything in Hawaii, All Japan, New Japan, all that Saturday block of show. We got everything in Hawaii, So we definitely watched with a great deal of interest. I just Cactus Jack being a part of it. He was one of those guys that me and my friends would always see in the wrestling magazines and that we adored. And then later, when I got into it in '93, then you got to start hearing the stories and all of the madness and all the behind the scenes stuff that we really wanted to know. So it really came in at that time in my life when pro wrestling was everything. I was completely into it. And then the more salacious and insane the stories, the more I wanted to hear them. That's what I was into. Once I got into it in '93 and started doing it, I wanted to hear about every crazy wrestling story I could. And I heard a disproportionate amount about Herb Abrams and the wrestlers that were sort of attached to it because it was a part of the country that I wasn't really familiar with. Like he used like some Carolina guys, and that was like far out of my wheelhouse. So just fascinated with all of it. And I thought the documentary did a really good job. I mean, because an hour is not a lot of time to encapsulate all of that, but I thought they did a good job of really letting you feel the mood of what it was like. And when they're doing a show in a 3,000 seat place and they've got 200 people there, that sort of pit in your stomach promoter feeling actually hit me more than once, where I just went like, as if I was losing the money. I was just like, oh God, I know what that feels like to have a disappointing house. And he took the promoter. He's, like I said, he lives in every promoter I've ever met. Like every promoter I've ever met has bullshitted a number. Every promoter I've ever met acts like whistles past the graveyard. Like, oh guys, it's great. Every promoter I've ever met wanted to throw themselves in the show as much as possible and were convinced that they were the ace up the sleeve to saving the promotion. So I don't think we're as far away from Herb Abrams as we like to pretend. And that era of wrestling um, was about partying and carrying on and all of that. So I just loved it.
I definitely think there's a, I know personally, like anytime I've ever been to a show, it didn't matter how many pre-sales there were, it didn't matter how well it was promoted. There's always that fear in the back of your mind when the doors open. What if no one show? I mean, what if there's 20 people
Yeah.
out there? It's like you've got that kind of mentality already. Every show, it doesn't matter how big or small. It's that's always there for me. It doesn't matter. I mean, we had a show with like 180 pre-sales or something one time, and it was just like I was still worried. Like it's until
Hmm.
you see them out there, that is in the back of your mind. Um, so, Caleb, was this episode, because you're the youngest person on the show at the moment? Was this episode your introduction to the UWF?
Yes, it was because the year, or 1990 when it launched. The year before that, I had just been born. Uh,
Yeah,
so I did not know what wrestling was, nor did I know what TV was at the time. So yeah, I had to find out about this years later, basically. And me, you like to joke that I watch more wrestling than anyone. And
I'm not joking when I say that, buddy.
I know that. But yeah, when I heard about this, I was just like, wow, I don't even know about this UWF thing. So I guess that just goes to show you, like, I guess how crazy and how kind of unsuccessful it was. Like it just, yeah, the stuff that I found out though in this episode. I'll just go ahead and say it. I thought this was one of the best episodes of Dark
Yeah.
Side of the Ring on this one. It just there's so much just good stuff in this episode. It really is, and it's such a crazy story. But I love how like this guy Herb Abrams, like kind of when they talk about him, I'm like at times I'm like this guy sounds like. Have you ever seen the movie Catch Me If You Can?
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio's character. That's what this guy sounds like.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
he sounds like a legit at times, like almost like a con artist.
He's definitely a con artist. I
Yeah.
mean, I love the part where they're trying to. They're It's clear that they're asking the guys they're interviewing, what did Herb Abrams do? How did he make his money? And nobody really, other than Lenny Doog, I think is the way you pronounce his last name, is
Yeah,
Doog.
yeah,
Um, Other than Lenny Doog, who was kind of like his right hand man, and you could tell this guy was like if Herb Abrams had had a cult, this would have been like the guy right under him that like keeps all the other cultists
yes.
believing everything. Uh, he's like the prophet of Herb Abrams. He was 100% bought in on Herb's bullshit. I mean,
Because
Yeah.
what would he have been? I mean, to be devil's advocate, what would he have been without Herb Abrams? I mean,
right.
he quickly understood, like, oh, these are good looking hookers. Like that is one of the funniest things ever when he describes them as what, like Hollywood honeys instead of these whatever. And he hitched his wagon and he does what all wrestling people do, which is I'm going to get myself involved in an angle with him, and then that way I get to keep my job. And but like you said, he was definitely of the cult of Herb. He
Yeah.
knew.
Yeah, him. So him and Marty Esberg, both. I mean, there's that one clip where Marty Esberg is like, "This is the darkest. Like UWF is like the darkest story there is. It can't get any darker than that." And I'm
Getting
like,
darker than
I'm,
Herb Abrams.
right. I was like, really? Have you seen the other episodes of Dark Side of the Ring? I
Well,
mean,
I mean, and Herb. Okay, this is going to be a completely contrary opinion to most people. Herb Abrams was fucking happy. It's kind of
right,
like when people go like Ric Flair, he blew his money, he wasn't a good father. All that's true. But Ric Flair lived a life that people would murder their children to live, right? At the end of the day, he's just outlived his usefulness. That's all that happened. He would, and if you ask Ric Flair, he would never expect that he would be alive right now,
right,
right? He just burned that candle. And Herb Abrams too. Um, people want to deride it. He's writing $2,000 checks to hookers. Okay, this is a phenomenon in not just wrestling but the entertainment world, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying it, but I'm going to say it. And everybody who's my age or older who's been doing any kind of thing in pro wrestling, entertainment, or even sports has encountered these guys. They're Jewish guys who have a lot of money who want to get in with the cool kids, so they do it by paying for everything and being the life of the party. It is not an uncommon phenomenon at all. It's very common. And I've definitely known a Herb Abrams or two in my day who would come to the wrestling shows, buy out the table for you, and they just wanted to hang out. And it was their way of, and they were sort of they were always hyper conscious of being Jewish. And so you weren't supposed to bring that up, right? You couldn't even really joke about it most of the time, though they would be very self-deprecating. And then they would just pay, and then they would pay for everything, and that's how the relationship worked. Like the boys used Herb Abrams. Now they didn't emphasize that, but it's absolutely the truth. Old veteran wrestlers, whenever a new promotion starts, they flock to you, and their goal is to milk you for money until you inevitably fail, and then they get to say, I told you so. Terry Funk did the same thing with ECW. It's just that ECW happened to make it. But at first, Terry Funk's attitude was, oh, there's this dumb money mark, Todd Gordon and Paul Heyman, and I'm just going to ride this train. They're going to pay me this money, and then it's going to die, and then I'm going to move on. That's how the wrestlers treated this too. As much as they want to pretend that they didn't, they definitely knew they were in for a disaster, so they were going to get paid until they didn't. So, my opinion.
I mean, there's people doing that right now. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe not at this exact moment, but people did it with AEW. People were like, these guys don't know what they're doing. It's the boys running, the asylum. We're gonna use this to get more money out of WWE, or tease that we're gonna go there so we can get a new contract from Vince or whatever. And Vince had tons of people sitting on the payroll, so they wouldn't go. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, if when Chris Jericho insists on not signing a contract through AEW but directly with the Khan family, so that way they can't declare bankruptcy and get out of it, to me that spells I'm going to make sure I get paid throughout the shit, but I don't have enough faith in it to think that it's going to be around in 3 years.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
Jericho has seen his fair share of this kind of thing. So,
sure.
over the years. Um, so, 1990, this thing kicks off. We've got a fan convention here that was run by not Rick Allen,
Resi.
John
Yeah,
Arezzi. And these fan conventions are very popular now, but this was apparently sort of the first one, where that got kind of big. So it's just like you said, man. Herb Abrams comes in here and he's got all this money. He's like, "Oh, I want to be a wrestling promoter," and he's talking up all the boys and he's selling them on the stick. And of course, he thinks that it's getting a good reception, but it's like you said, these wrestlers are like, "Oh, you got a bunch of money? You're gonna start a wrestling promotion? And you're gonna pay me how much? Okay, all right, buddy. Just long as the check clears, which they did at the time, apparently.
yeah,
He's thinking, oh man, these guys are really interested in my ideas. But I mean, they didn't really cover this in the show, but we know that they were probably thinking, at least most of them, like, all right, well, this guy's gonna spend a bunch of money on this, and he's gonna pour $1 million into wrestling and then lose it all, and that's gonna be it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
he brought some big names in though.
Yes,
Tell me what you guys think about this lineup he had: Paul Orndorff, Bob Orton, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, Cactus Jack. I mean, Paul Orndorff's main event WrestleMania 1. You couldn't have gotten any bigger in 1990 than some of these guys.
yeah, yeah. It does go against the old adage, though, right? Because I'm sure the boys are filling his head up with, if you get the talent, wrestling's talent based, you get these names, people are going to just flock to it. Um, like UWF, and I'm trying to recall more of those shows, but to me, it's like it ultimately it didn't suffer because they didn't have talent. It suffered because they didn't have a vision, right? There was nothing there. Why am I watching the UWF? What's it come down to? A bunch of very good wrestlers that didn't have true star potential. I mean, like Paul Orndorff, phenomenal hand, legit tough guy, all of that stuff. But are people going to buy a pay-per-view because Paul Orndorff is on it when it's not in the WWF? And I guess we found out the answer is not really. And and I find it really fascinating that the problem with Herb Abrams is the problem that most wrestling promotions have, is his vision consists of, I'll get all of these guys together and then I will be a major part of the angle. And then that's what we're going to base the show on. And it just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work. It's about angles. It's about whatever. It's not about whether you're wearing yellow ostrich skin cowboy boots with your logo on it. Though, of course, that's awesome. And it's like right now they're showing the Blackjack Brawl. So this is in '94. So they had time to figure this stuff out. That's what's crazy. If it was one of these flashes in the pan that blew a bunch of money in 9 months to a year and it was gone, that would be one thing. But they were around long enough that they could have developed an angle. Like, what's the UWF angle that survives to this day? We can't think of a single one. Whereas ECW, whose run is not nearly as long as people thought that was, you're talking legitimately when they were taken seriously, 95 to 99 to 2000. That's only 5 or 6 years. But if I
Yeah.
said, name some ECW angles, even people who hate ECW would be able to go on and on and on about the different angles that they had, personalities that they had that really stood out, things that are imitated and stolen. That's, for me, it's really strange that the UWF was around long enough, but yet there's not one innovation or one thing that you can say this other wrestling league stole from them because it was so good. And I don't know if I've ever heard of that in any promotion that had pay-per-views. Like, everybody steals anything that's any good, but UWF, they literally took nothing from it, which is really weird, actually, you know.
Yeah, I mean, B. Brian Blair talks about it. That's a tongue twister. Talks about it
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
in the episode a little bit. Is like they didn't have the skill of seeing like the strengths and weaknesses of certain guys and then putting them together and building an angle. It was all spectacle. It was just all, hey, we're gonna put, these two guys are famous. Let's put them in a match together. And they didn't really understand the concept of what they would actually have to do in order to draw people in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the boys clearly didn't respect Herb Abrams. And I'm not saying they should have, but I mean they didn't. And so who are you going to listen to? I mean, if Blackjack Mulligan's telling you something, yeah, you'll tend to listen to it a little more. But I thought it was interesting that they brought up Blackjack Mulligan very infrequently, which tells me that he either didn't do a lot or he just did it dry erase board style. You're wrestling you, you're wrestling you, you're wrestling you, you know?
Yeah, well, and I think it's also, the fact of Herb Abrams, was so coked up,
Yeah.
that they said it. He would change things literally on the fly. Like he would be like,
Yeah.
"No, you know what? I'm reversing the decision, giving him the title," and
Oh my god.
stuff. Like, think
Oh
about
my god.
like Blackjack goes and writes your name. Hey Cactus, you're facing Jimmy Snuka. Just for example, because that was one of the matches that they said. And that's funny because if you think about that, is that not a dream match for wrestling fans?
Yeah.
And people didn't even know that it happened.
Right.
I did not know that Mick Foley got to wrestle his idol. I did not know that.
Right.
Yeah.
I can tell you right there, some of the problems. But like, just say like, they write that on and it's for the title. They say, Jack, you're going to win it. And then Herb Abrams just comes out and is just like, no, I'm going to give it to this man because we just got to throw something out there. Like if you go and you watch the Fury Hour, they've got some of the episodes up on YouTube, just like the UWF, and you can find some. So I looked at them. It's just like take Russo's writing and then put it even like put it on cocaine.
Right.
That's what it looks like.
Vince Russo on cocaine might be the best Herb Abrams description.
How many times would you have to hear the word bro if Vince Russo was on cocaine?
Oh,
It would be like a machine gun of bros coming at you all the time.
One would just run into the other. He wouldn't even be able to finish the first one without going to the second one. You guys mentioned Blackjack Mulligan. I think it's very important to mention here that Mick Foley says at the time he announced Blackjack as the booker, he was incarcerated
Yeah.
at the time.
he even said that he was going to sign Bruiser Brody, but Bruiser Brody had been murdered a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, shameless plug. You can catch our episode on that. It was very good, but yeah, I mean, that to me, that if you're the wrestling fan, if you're like a hardcore wrestling fan, that should have been the red light to you. Like, hey, there are problems here. They're advertising a guy who has been dead for almost a year as a big star on their show.
But again, like every promoter's got a Herb Abram in them. How many times has somebody, even in recent memory in Georgia, promoted a match where they knew one of the participants wasn't going to be there and wasn't going to happen, right? It didn't I know I'll get in trouble, but it's me. So like IWE did that, right? Like they promoted a match where they knew the one guy wasn't going to be there, and then they ended up subbing for him, but they put him on posters knowing he wasn't going to be there already. And so like the promoters by hook or by crook traditionally in wrestling do this kind of thing because again, you just talk out of your ass and you just talk things up because for every person that will get offended by your lying to them, there's two people that tend to just get excited about the energy of it all, right?
Right.
It's a Trump thing, right? So it's like it doesn't matter if what I'm saying isn't true. It just matters the idea that I'm trying to convey. So if I just say enough, we've got more testing going on than anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter if that's an objective statement that can be proven or not proven. It just matters the idea of, oh, well, he seems to be on top of it. So yeah, sure, I said Bruiser Brody would be there, and Bruiser Brody's already dead, but I guarantee you Herb Abrams was probably never confronted with that information. And if he had been, he would have ignored it, denied it, then denied that he ever said it, or just went, yeah, you know how I am, man. Anyway, but we do have so and so and so and so and so and so. Because his whole goal is, I just want people hyped for this thing. So I'm just going to throw out the biggest stuff I can, whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the press conference that he announces, UWF4. It's basically, it's a big spectacle. Like Dan Spivey attacks someone, they, wreck the place and stuff like that. He's trying to work an angle.
Yeah.
And maybe they did, if not innovate that notion, they probably popularized it. I don't, I'm trying to think of anything before that did a similar thing. Contract signings, for example, in the 80s were very stoic affairs, right? It's Hogan Andre, where they have a segment, they come together, they say a little thing, that's it. This notion of during your press conference, everything goes to hell, which is now a wrestling staple. Maybe they did start that because 90, 91, 92, that was a long time ago. Even like you think about TNA when they had like Jeff Jarrett belt Hogan with a guitar to try to launch that thing that ended up going nowhere. But I thought like, but that was, well after Herb Abrams did a similar kind of thing. So that's interesting. Maybe they did popularize that. So
Maybe that's their one claim to fame.
maybe.
And you mentioned
And the
that
promoter having the greatest death in the history of wrestling. I mean, that's ridiculous,
that's
right?
true. That's true. We definitely will get into that a little bit in a little bit. You mentioned the whole like every promoter has some Herb Abrams in them.
Yeah.
That it's such a prevalent thing for people to announce talent they don't have or they know they're not going to have. That when we brought Christopher Daniels in, we got at least 3 messages from everyday fans that said, "Is he really going to be there?" It's like, no, we had just advertised him knowing he was going to be there. And it was like, wait a minute, people do that all the time. I mean, it's like, it's that common still in 2020 for people to hype up this big thing. Oh, we got this guy, we got this guy, we got this guy. And, unless they're going to call you out on it and you just haven't talked to them at all and they're going to expose you on social media, which I can't think of.
Nobody gave a shit about PCW until we actually pulled off the first Sacred Ground. And everything I had heard when we started putting out posters and flyers of the first Sacred Ground was, this is not possible, right? It is not possible that they're bringing these people in, right? Because it was Samoa Joe, Colt Cabana, like Cassandro, Awesome Kong. Think about that, right? This is more than 10 years ago. So we got Samoa Joe at like his height in TNA. We got Awesome Kong right when she stopped her TNA run. And people were like, there's no way that this is happening, right? Like it's just not possible. And I was sort of treated like that Money Mark guy, right? So a lot of people contacted me wanting to be on the show, and I knew why, because they were going like, well, whatever money this guy's using, we need to get in there and get some of it before he goes out of business. Right? And then, but then the first Sacred Ground happened. And that after the first one is when I started getting access to better local talent, because I think the feeling was, okay, he's not full of shit. At least he brought in these guys that he said he was going to. There were at least more than 10 people at that show. Okay, I guess I'll come do his other shows and see what they're about. Because again, Herb Abrams, he's the outsider coming in. And he, like an idiot, like immediately his target is Vince McMahon in the WWF.
Yeah.
Which seems just preposterous. But again, things just seemed much more attainable back then. Now, it takes AEW kind of bankroll to be taken seriously. But there was a time where even in even in 1990, where the WWF is not nearly the juggernaut that people remember it to be. They didn't draw in some parts of the country even then. That's what people forget. They just go like, Hogan came on board, they took over wrestling. In certain parts of the country, that was very far from the truth. That certain parts of the country did not buy the WWF thing at all. UWF's problem was, who was their audience? Like, what region of the country or specific kind of wrestling fan were they going for? I don't think they ever had any clue, which makes them super fascinating to me. So,
Yeah, I mean, they even talked about that a little bit in the and this is one we haven't covered yet, in the Dino Bravo episode.
yeah.
Of, in his area in Canada, like, he was bigger than Hogan, in that area, and they weren't sure, they didn't want to do the match because they weren't sure Hogan would be able to get a babyface reaction against him. And
Mhm.
it's like, it's hard to imagine now with WWE having decades of being, the face of wrestling to the world, to imagine a time when they were just kind of this northeastern territory and that was it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, like that's a good example, right? Like the WWF, like when you look at who Hogan did not have a run against, that's the most interesting question because everybody wanted to have a run with Hogan, right? That's like 10 paydays you're gonna get. But like Jake Roberts, and this is a part of the reason they turned Jake face, right? Between 2 and 3, is this is WrestleMania 2. This is like the height of Hulkamania stuff. And he wrestles Jake at a house show, and a section of the crowd is chanting DDT, and they freaked out because even back then, the problem with the WWE is a lot of their crowd weren't wrestling fans. They were sort of irony hipsters, whatever you would have called hipsters back then. And they were much more fascinated with the Jake Roberts than a Hulk Hogan. And back then, they're still running under an old wrestling model where that's unacceptable. So we'll turn Jake Roberts face, we'll make him the gatekeeper guy. You get in a feud with Jake Roberts, beat him, and then that gets you to Hogan. But Jake Roberts, I mean, I'm sure Jake Roberts was salivating. Oh, I'm going to have this great run with Hogan, right? I dropped him with a DDT on television. We're set. But then they had their first match, and a big section of the crowd's chanting DDT. Now he's fucked. He got one match with Hogan, you know? So,
And
yeah.
that was awesome. I don't care what anyone says. That would have been amazing had those two wrestled.
yeah. Greg Valentine was another one that Hogan, he considered Greg Valentine too stiff. So Valentine beat him by count out to start their run because they were going to like go around the loop and then come back to Madison Square Garden. But Hogan didn't like wrestling Valentine because you couldn't hit Hogan hard, and Valentine didn't know any other way to do it. And so Hogan was like ixnay on that, and so Valentine never got another match with him.
and
So
that's money, and he knew he had that kind of control.
yeah.
So let's talk about Beach Brawl, the the pay-per-view that drew less than some Georgia indie shows. Uh, they had a so they hyped this thing up. They did it in Palmetto, Florida, which, I mean, it seems like to me you'd have to have drawn in most of the population of
Yeah.
the area in order to have this show. The headline match was Dr. Death Steve Williams versus Bam Bam Bigelow, which, it's well, like we've talked about. That is a match I would like to see in
Yeah.
'91. Not now, of course, but in '91, that would have been a great match. But of course, there's no build up, no program, no hype for it, and they did a buy rate of 0.1.
Mm,
TNA used to, when they were only on pay-per-views, and they did a weekly kind of like pay-per-view
yeah.
or whatever. They drew more than that
Yeah.
on pay-per-view on a weekly basis. Point
Even when
zero
the
one.
show started.
Yeah,
Yes.
less than 500 in attendance in the arena in this enormous stadium. Uh, yeah, I mean, so what did you guys think about this?
Well,
Uh, well, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
no,
off.
no, go.
Yeah, when I saw this, I was like, they made it seem like, when they got to the arena, they saw how big it was, and they were like, I know that there's no way that we can fill this up. And I'm thinking, wouldn't you know that beforehand? Like, I would think that you wouldn't just show up to the venue on the day and just be like, oh crap, we can't fill this up. Like, but that just goes to show you how no one knew what was going on in UWF.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like you look at that match, the Dr. Death and Bam Bam Bigelow. Keep in mind, this is like in the early '90s. Regions still mattered. Florida didn't care about Bam Bam Bigelow. Florida doesn't care about Dr. Death Williams. Like that, they're products of different parts of the country. Like Bam Bam Bigelow trained at the Monster Factory in Jersey, and like again, it's wanting to compete, like wanting to go national before you were ready is what killed every promotion in the 80s and 90s. Like every one of them. If Mid-South had stayed in Oklahoma and Louisiana and Texas, they would have been able to blow the WWF out of there with dynamite and make it pretty well. Now, when the oil prices fell, there's nothing they could do about that, but they certainly wouldn't have been strung out like they were, where they're having, $1 million properties in Dallas and all this kind of nonsense. Like, and again, what could Crockett have done if they had not moved Starcade to Chicago in this effort to expand when their audience base is at a certain region of the country? It is what it is. Would Dusty Rhodes been able to go to Portland and draw a huge house? Probably not. But within Florida, he's as big a draw as anybody's ever seen. So again, it's just another case of the UWF having these big visions. And we see that in Georgia promotions and small promotions all the time. We're going to run such and such building, right? They get all hyped up for it. That's Stranglehold in a nutshell. I went to the venue and I took pictures of like, you're drawing fucking 40 people to a 1,000 seat thing, but deluding yourself. I mean, it's so easy to do because promoters that don't think about wrestling just think about, they see people in the seats when they look out, before they do anything. They just go like, wow, if I charge $10, multiply it by a sold out house, my God, there's my budget. There it is, 15 grand or whatever. That's my budget to work with. And then they work backwards, and then they just spend show day with their guts twisted up. I mean, and Herb Abrams had the benefit of dealing with, well, I'll just coke up, and he did have a lot of money at one point, right? He had a secondary bank account that had a crap ton of money. So I don't, like he is a con man, don't get me wrong, but I don't think what he was trying to do was con his way into successful wrestling promotion. He would have loved that to happen, but I just think he's analogous to these other guys that I know that were just happy to be a player in the game and happy to call himself a promoter. And they didn't really think about the business part of it. That was definitely secondary or third on the priority list. It was, I want to be part of this. He's a wrestling fan first. I think they did a great job of conveying that. Herb Abrams loved pro wrestling, and this was his way to buy his way into the business. And we've certainly seen numerous examples of that in Georgia promotions. And in a way, there's nothing wrong with that. I know that sounds weird for me of all people to say, but I don't begrudge people who aren't pro wrestling people who get into the pro wrestling business. I don't begrudge it. In fact, I encourage it. I think it's better because pro wrestling people who are pro wrestling people from birth and they're huge fans of it, and that's all they've ever wanted to do, they make terrible people to run shit in pro wrestling.
Yeah. I
So Herb,
you look at Jim Cornette as a good example of that kind of thing. Like, he's like the ultimate wrestling historian. And you would always, like, if you look at like a lot of the roles he's played, anybody, any wrestling person who's running a show would love to have Jim Cornette on hand to take advice from, but you wouldn't want him running everything because if you're a wrestling person, to that extent, you can't think outside of that box, and that's what
Right.
people are looking for. And you know,
Absolutely.
there's
Yeah,
some things that Herb Abrams did. We talked about the press conference going to shit. That's an outside the box thing where, you know, a professional wrestling person thinks, hey, this needs to be this formal kind of event because we want this to look like a legitimate whatever. And then this guy's like, no, this should be entertaining. Let's let them beat the shit out of each other and destroy the set, you know?
And he's a good performer. I think that's something that got glossed over. But when they showed him cutting those emotional promos, by the way, when he got color, Daryl Morris, he got fucking color, right? Herb Abrams is gushing blood. And he's cutting this promo that feels very heartfelt and real and all of that shit. Like, it's interesting that the promoters starting in the 90s all were really good performers. I think Vince McMahon has proven himself arguably to be one of the 3 best pro wrestling performers there's ever been. Like, really great at it. Eric Bischoff, the character, is the most punchable guy in the history of wrestling. Phenomenal performer. Vince Russo, not so much, but like, but I mean, Herb Abrams was a good little performer, which was probably the worst thing that could have happened to them, honestly, because then he justified. I'm sure he used that to justify. Oh, I'm good, aren't I? And you know what the boys told him? Yeah, man, you're fucking great. You're the best, because they're just trying to get a check. But there's probably an element of that of truth too, of like, wow, that's, you know, say what you want about this little Jew, because that's what the wrestlers would have called him, right? Oh, the Jewish guy with the money. But when he got color, right? Instant respect. When he cut the promo, it was a good promo, instant respect. And so he lived his dream. He bought his way in and then got enough acceptance. And he died covered in Vaseline, wearing cowboy boots and nothing else, with hookers around. So
I
live
mean,
the gimmick.
he went out. I mean, you know, and you got this guy. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about, you know, when he gets to the part where he's, you know, to the point where he's writing the checks he knows going to bounce. Okay, yeah, we
Yeah.
can all decry that, but we know promoters that have done it at every level of the game. He was just, you know, pretty much the most famous one.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think last year didn't that happen at like a show that had a bunch of legends on it last year? I can't remember the
Yes.
event, but yeah, all these checks bounced and people were looking for this guy and
There
calling
was
him
one
out.
in like Dudley, Georgia, or something like that, where that happened, and like Paul Orndorff, who was there, like, and somebody else had to like rough up the promoter. And I mean, it used to happen more frequently. I think now, with the internet and loudmouths like me and you, who are like calling every stupid thing out, um, I think it's less prone to happen, but it's always going to happen, because you're always going to have guys whose eyes are bigger than their stomach, right? Who are going to have ambition. They're not going to want to start at a grinded out level at the bottom. I mean, that's Herb Abrams, right? I'm not I'm not going to run small little outlaw shows. Fuck that. I'm going to be the new Vince McMahon, right? I'm going to blah blah blah. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go bigger. Maybe that's something else that Herb Abrams actually innovated, which is the idea of the guy that's running the whole show being a major part of an angle. That had been done before to an extent, but it was always this like old wrestler who is now running the promotion that would reluctantly come out of retirement, like Bill Watts or something. But he might have been the first guy who was like, I'm the wacky wrestling promoter that has no right to do any of this shit, but this guy blooded me up and so it's on. And like, I mean, that's now the norm in wrestling, right? I mean, I'm still waiting for David Manders to get heavily involved in an angle. I know it's coming, right? Like
Right, at
at
some point,
at
it's
some
got to
point,
be.
it's got to, because or Gary Lamb. Like I'm sure they have to drag Gary Lamb kicking and screaming out of doing more.
Well,
But
yeah,
they've
he's been
already,
involved in a few where they,
yeah, he's been attacked a time or two, right?
yeah.
And then
So
nothing comes of it except him burying the heels verbally. And so, yeah, like Herb Abrams, super fascinating. And again, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it. For all the bounce checks that the boys got at the end, they they basically abused and raped that promotion with the paychecks that they got beforehand that more than made up for the ones that bounced. I'm sure they were all incredibly overpaid. I'm sure that they all had first class treatment in the first few years, to the point where it was probably their favorite promotion to go work and wrestle for because of the 5-star treatment. I mean, all of them got rooms at the MGM Grand when they did the show there, and they were all treated like kings. And if they had been smart, as they all claim to have been, they would have just basically known at some point this gravy train is going to end, because we're not stupid. We're wrestling in front of 200 people, right? At some point, this is going to end. But again, wrestlers don't think that way. They're just like, oh, just keep it going. One more time, Herb, one more time. So, when they're holding a bounce check in their hands, when they're in Palmetto with nobody in the crowd in this huge arena, I mean, not that I'm saying it's their fault, but they're part and parcel of this story as well. The boys definitely got paid. I would be curious to hear how much, but I'm sure it was at least double what they would make anywhere else. So
Yeah, I mean, you kind of get that impression that at least at first, it's like, okay, we were buying into the guy's natural charisma and of course his checkbook.
yeah.
But when you've never seen more than 300 people there and you're making, you can do the math. This is what they're charging for a seat. This is what my rate is. If they're paying me this, they're probably paying the next guy something similar. If the talent budget alone is more than you're drawing,
Oh
that
God,
you're in the red
hit my
constantly.
stomach hearing that.
Me
Oh
too.
God.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I do want to talk about the Colonel again. We brought him up earlier. Marty Yesberg, and he had the kind of feud with Herb. This guy was super entertaining to me.
Yeah,
I could
he's the
watch
right guy to
this.
have on.
Yeah, I could. It's like when the news, like, there's like a tornado and the news finds like the most like ignorant like redneck person to interview, in the area. That was like this guy. He's talking about the porn scene or whatever in the hotel room, and he's like, I just sat over in the corner and watched. I didn't really know what to
First
do.
of all, he fucked one of those hookers. Can we
Yeah.
just
Oh yeah, he did.
so these are the hottest women I've ever seen. Herb is offering for me to have sex with them, but as soon as I saw the cocaine, I just said, I'm just gonna sit in the corner and watch. He fucked those hookers. I understand he has to say that he did it, but let's be clear, he fucked those hookers.
Well, there's no
So I'm
one
sorry.
to dispute it, right? The only people in the room were
Correct.
him, Herb, and the hookers. Herb's dead, and these hookers aren't going to come out and say, "Oh,
No.
yeah, you know."
They're still going. We got paid $2,000 each. Can you imagine that? Those hookers got $2,000 a piece. Oh,
Yeah,
Herb.
yeah. I mean,
Remember that.
he's over there. He admits he's drooling on himself. These are the hottest women I've ever seen. You know, and I'm just like,
They was all that in a bag of chips.
yeah.
These weren't no Carolina whatevers. These were like some Hollywood honeys. Oh my God.
Having spent a significant portion of my life living just across the river from South Carolina, I
Yeah.
completely understood that reference. Um, yeah, man. So
But
another,
anyway, but he's there, and I love that he was the Jiminy Cricket taking us through this journey. I thought that was a great. I noticed a lot of wrestling people. I'm talking about like Ron Niemi and other promoter types that I saw, like Rudy Gonzalez and that kind of thing. We're all kind of shitting on the documentary. They're like, "Oh, I already knew all that stuff," and they could have got people who could have told those same stories but better. And I thought to myself, and I always ask myself why? Why are these particular guys, when I loved it? Obviously, Caleb, you loved it. Like,
Mhm.
I thought it was one of the better ones that they've put out. And I'm like, why are these promoters looking for a reason to hate this thing? And I realized it's because they recognize themselves within Herb Abrams. And it's a very painful mirror to look at. Like I said, my stomach is knotted up even now, us talking about certain aspects of it, because I'm like, I remember when I did some variation of that. Right. I remember when I've been there in a show where I'm looking at the door and I'm like, I'm not making my money back. Why did I ever book this much? Why did I ever think this would work? Um, and I think a lot of promoters have a hard time acknowledging the fact that a lot of pro wrestling is based on fantasy bullshit, and a lot of it is deluding yourself on how good you are and how good your promotion is and how good what your legacy is. I mean, they're terrified that their legacy is going to be like Herb Abrams, which is at the end of the day, Herb Abrams is it's kind of a joke. It's a very dark joke, but at the end of the day, people don't take Herb Abrams seriously. It's just seen as a cautionary tale that couldn't possibly happen nowadays, right? No way could it happen. But yet it very well could. And I think that's a little too painful for those guys to face.
We talked about off mic that he's like the ultimate, tax return promoter because we see that every year. As a matter of fact, if COVID-19 wasn't going on right now, there would be these little shows popping up for the last month, people getting the tax return in. Oh, this will be it this time. And then, throwing this big thing together. And then, of course it draws 200 and they booked, 10 grand worth of talent and, it's just gone.
Yeah, I mean, or even, you look at Stranglehold, who people just keep sending me these clips. I guess they did sort of an impromptu wrestling show a couple of weeks ago. And so these clips are slowly leaking out of the guys in street clothes. It just looks like shit, but I go like, how much money are they losing? Because they're paying a lease on that building and they haven't been able to do anything with it. And is that ambition not completely outsized for what they're able to do? They haven't had a show over 50 people yet, but they bring in Sabu, but they bring in like that kind of mentality of, I just need to bring in the right expensive name and we're going to draw. Like that has not changed since 1990. There's this notion that it's just a matter of getting the right person that's going to draw.
Right.
I mean, it's so how are they different than Herb Abrams? I mean, just Herb Abrams just did it on a much grander scale, which is why the story is so amazing. And certainly the personal foibles of promoters in Georgia are well known, right? So it's and their vices aren't nearly as great, but they still exist, right? If I have to hear one more time about Billy Knight spending the entire gate at the strip club after the show, it is what it is, right? But I mean, what are the vices of promoters? Of course, they're crazy people. Promoters are all crazy people, even the ones that seem normal. Like Joshua Hancock seems completely normal to me, but I'm sure there's a part of him that's a wackadoo because you got to be a wackadoo to promote pro wrestling.
To be in wrestling at all,
Yeah.
And I can't comment on that, of course. Can't comment on that at all.
I mean, Caleb, I have a question for you because like, obviously you were born right before UWF started,
Right.
but when you look back now that you've had like contact with the documentary and you've looked at some UWF stuff, like you look at that, does that do you understand why it happened, or do you look at it from a younger person's perspective of like that's completely insane? Why would not somebody not have tackled him and stopped all of this? Or do you just go like, I can totally see why it all went down the way it did?
A little bit of both, because like I would have said that had I never stepped foot behind the wrestling curtain, so to speak. I would have said that. But now it's like, no, I can see that because I've seen promoters do that and stuff like that nowadays. So it's not far-fetched to me. And plus, you got to think about it too. If you're a talent in wrestling, like let's just say Cactus Jack, for instance, since he was in UWF, he was not Mick Foley, level like he is today back then. So he, he even says it on the thing. He's just looking for an opportunity.
Yeah.
So, I also think, you have to take that into consideration when it comes to a wrestler's mindset is a lot of them are just looking for an opportunity. And if they see an opportunity, they're going to take it. But it's not far-fetched to me now. But had I heard this story beforehand, I would have been like, that's stupid. Why would anyone, do that? But now I do see it. So it's an interesting thing. And here's the thing. You said it. He's a great performer. Well, if you're a salesman, you have to be.
That's true. That's a great point.
And
Yeah.
he's and if you're a con artist as well. Because think about it, and I go back to that, but I make the point of calling him that because look at everyone's reaction when they talk about him. They don't talk about him like, oh, he was this crooked promoter and everything. They talk about him like he's their best friend. That's what a con artist does. That's what a good salesman does. He sells himself to you.
And I mean, and wrestling is rife with those examples, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody should hate Kevin Nash. They should despise Kevin Nash, but they don't. Apparently, he's another one of these guys. You meet him, and he wins you over, and you forgive it.
A good example of that, Vince Russo.
Yeah,
we're back to Russo.
Yeah.
If you talk to anyone, unless you're Cornette, but if you talk to anyone else, they'll tell you. Even Bischoff said it. He said, he won Bischoff over because he was very charming. He was very, convincing. And then, he got to know him and stuff like that. So then that all changed. But, it's not unlike Herb Abrams.
Now I just want a clip of like some UWF and then cut to the Russo watching the Brawl for All saying he's totally entertained right now.
I'm totally entertained by this, bro.
I'm totally I was listening to Conan talking about the Brawl for All, and Conan was like, man, I still think it was a genius idea. So it's like we're in the modern era where I think no matter what you're talking about, you can find prominent people who will vocally support and hate anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what that means. I mean, there's probably people out there that would try to argue that if not for a couple of bad breaks, the UWF really could have made it. I mean, I'm sure those people are out there. It's unbelievable to me that, like, when I was hearing Conan go on and on, no, bro. I think Brawl for All was a really good idea. I think you could do it today. He was making this argument that you could do it in NXT right now. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what the fuck? Like, even the biggest disaster in wrestling history? But I think that's where we are, right? And we see this in Georgia wrestling. We see this where even stuff that I always think like, okay, I'm going to take this position. And, I tend to take very odd positions on things because I find that interesting. But, okay, this one's a slam dunk. But God help me if two people don't come at me and go like, how could you say? I'm like, wow, I don't know. Like, really? Like, guys are going to have sex with 15 and 16-year-old girls. It's just the way I'm like, oh boy. Okay. Like,
that's one of those where you absolutely think it'd be a slam dunk.
Yeah.
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 You guys mentioned, like, we were talking about the, him being a con man or him being a good performer because he's a salesman. It has always struck me the ratio of how many indie wrestling promoters, like, their shoot job is that they sell used cars. I've just always thought there was a really interesting parallel between those two things. It kind of says something about your,
because sales, or like Caleb said, a con, I'm fascinated with con artists and carny stuff. There's a thing called putting somebody under the ether in the con game. And what it means is you get people to think emotionally and reactionary instead of critically. So you get around their sort of like intellectual defenses. That's what conning is, right? Like intellectually, I know that, such and such stockbroker saying he's going to double my money in 2 weeks makes no sense. But instead, he gets me to think like, imagine you'll be able to send your grandkids through school. You'll be able to be comfortable the rest of your life. Look at the car that I'm driving. You could have this car in no time flat. That's why people are like, people are so dumb. They're not dumb. you just got them to think emotionally. It happens all the time, and you see examples of it through this whole COVID thing. Like every other ad on Facebook is some kind of hustle and some kind of con, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, we see that you like to write by some algorithm. Oh, you can do all these writing jobs from home and it's so easy. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, obviously it's a con, but like, it's I say obviously it's a con, but pro wrestling is the master of it, right? Like, get all these people to give you money and you basically don't have to do anything, and it just throw your poster up online, and they'll just come and look, this guy just got released by the WWE. How many millions of people watch WWE? I'll just bring him in and all the people are going to flock and show up. And we all know, talking here, that it's not that easy.
Right.
It's nowhere close to that easy.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you look at the heyday of wrestling being the Monday Night War as far as how popular it was nationally in the US.
Mhm.
And it's mostly because of the angles that they were running and the long-term storylines they were building. I mean, you
Yeah.
look at there's definitely draws in there. Hogan, Austin, people like that. But
NWO.
yeah, I mean but the NWO was an angle.
Yeah.
It's like at one point they, in the Monday Night War documentaries they talked about, eventually 3 limos piled up and 60 guys got out and they were the NWO. We can't name two-thirds of those guys,
Yeah.
more than likely, but that was the angle that they were running, and that's what made it so big. And that's one of those things that a lot of these folks, especially if you're not a wrestling person, you don't understand it, that you have to do something compelling with those people. You have to have the
It's
talent, the
about
name
vision,
draw.
man.
Yeah,
It's about vision, and it's getting everybody to look the same way and pull the same direction in order to get a thing over. And I mean, I'm sure some of the other problems UWF had were guys didn't want to go under, right? Because we're in 1990, and so there's still this notion: if I lose, I'm done. And so nobody wanted to lose. Nobody wanted to, if everybody's special, then nobody is. And UWF definitely ran into those kind of problems as well.
I like
So
the aspect of Abrams that he absolutely loved to destroy furniture, especially like cushions in particular. Like I guess this guy just
oh
hates
yeah,
cushions.
that's right.
Uh,
And he was like paranoid that people were like, listening in or watching him, like Marty Esper. He looked through the peephole. They're coming. They're coming.
well,
And
it couldn't have helped that he had Marty Yesberg around, and Marty Yesberg's sitting there thinking that the SWAT team's going to break down the door because they've got some hookers in there.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and I mean, and what causes that paranoia? Obviously, it's drug fueled. Obviously, Herb Abrams probably has something chemically going wrong upstairs a little bit. But we also do, how did he make his money? I'm sure it wasn't clean and neat. I'm sure it was something that was tied in with God knows who. So, you know, uh, I mean, again, AEW in so many ways has it good in the sense that the money's legitimate. They can afford to lose a lot of it, and they are, right? But they're doing it with an aim in mind. There's like an end goal. Um, but at the same time, the danger is if for some reason they decide to pull up stakes and end it, it's done, right? There's
right.
no obligation beyond I'm interested in doing this thing and being a part of this thing. Um, like that's the part that's sort of I'm curious that's why I'm fascinated with AEW, because there's so many ways it can go. And if it's true that basically Tony Khan is booking a lot of the shows on a napkin, that's fascinating to me as well. That um eventually they're going to have to develop a lot of these structures that they don't want to have, but they're gonna have to have them. If they're doing more than 2 hours of television a week, you can't keep Vince Russoing it. At
Right.
some point, you have to have a true vision of where this thing is going to go. Once your ambition becomes 2 million people watching instead of just beating a show that's getting 500,000, what does that mean? What structures are you going to have to put in place? Can you keep signing every indie guy that catches your fancy, even if they're not going to draw a dime? the answer is no. Eventually, they're going to have to evolve and change too. But at least, unlike Herb Abrams, you don't get the feeling that everybody up top who's got the money is going to self-destruct tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that part's good.
Well, it's interesting too because this is veering off topic. We do that a lot on this show though. Uh,
Mhm.
if Fox does buy out WWE or say Disney buys them out,
Yeah.
this era of we're gonna keep people under contract to keep them from going somewhere else is over because that's a Vince McMahon thing. That's not something that a company like Disney or Fox is gonna do. So that's going to be interesting. Can they keep from salivating over WWE releasing 50 people if that happens? Can they keep from trying to snatch up everybody and end up in that WCW situation where you have to have a 40-man cruiserweight battle royal because you have too many people on your damn
Yeah.
roster? You just can't even book them all. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I really hope there won't be a AEW Dark Side of the Ring episode in 5-10 years or something.
I don't think that there is. I just
Well,
I
you do
don't.
have the hat on, so
This is true.
I don't think there will be either. I don't think there will be either if I had to bet on it. But
I would say I don't know if there's going to be. That's what's so fascinating.
right,
Because I mean, there like when you look at the pros and cons, like the pros are humongous, but the cons are also things that people don't talk about. Like, I mean, Cody Rhodes is the best worker in the business because he's found a way to have a brand attached to AEW that's not theirs, that's his. Like Nightmare Factory is his. Nightmare Everything is his. Like if it all ended tomorrow, he would still be able to have that part of his business. And I find that and Jericho gets paid directly by the family. Like all these things to me speak to the wrestlers abusing them. But I don't think it's that cut and dry, but it's undeniable that they're making unbelievable and up to now unjustified amounts of money. Jericho is the best, but is he worth that many millions to them right now? Has he produced that? Not really. Potentially it could happen, but I mean, there's a lot of money going to wrestlers and a lot of money going out and not a lot coming in. That's usually a recipe for disaster, but AEW also has a chance to do things that nobody's done in a long time. So I'm certainly rooting for them, but I don't know. I don't know.
well, rooting for them too because what it means for the wrestling business, right? It's possible this could be the last time we see this happen.
Yeah,
Because if a billionaire can't sink money into a business that's run by someone who, with the notoriety of Cody Rhodes and the Rhodes
sure.
family in general, you've got all this behind it. You've got kind of some of the best like indie minds involved in this, the best indie talents involved in this. I mean, I don't know if there is a better like perfect storm, so to speak, for somebody to be able to compete with the behemoth that is the WWE. This could be the last time there's a major attempt at it.
Yeah, and I mean they got him when they're wounded, which is also when WCW whipped their ass because they got him when they were wounded. They got him in the early 90s when Jim Cornette's part of the group that's booking some of the worst shit in history. And
Yeah.
right now the WWE, as much as people want to argue against it, they're booking some of the most not just the worst stuff, the most boring stuff going.
Yes.
And so AEW has a really great opportunity. I mean, it's no secret that I like constantly funnel the ideas to them. Like, my latest thing was without knowing it, they stumbled upon something really great, which is Jake Roberts is going to cut a promo. Him and Arn Anderson are going to cut these promos against each other. And I think to myself, like, why are they not promoting that? Because that's something that could get an old wrestling fan to watch again. Nothing
Right.
else they're doing will. So why not go like, we got Jake the Snake Roberts and Arn Anderson, who are two totally different regions, right? WWF or NWA/WCW, and they're gonna cut this promo. That's fucking amazing, right? Like promote that. Start looking beyond 600,000 to 700,000. You've got them. They're gonna stay with you. Clearly, if they're staying through all of this, they're gonna stay. Let's see what we can do by getting other people to watch. That's what's exciting about AEW. That's the one place that Impact doesn't have a prayer. I don't
Yep.
care what they do. I don't care how good their show is. and how good so and such is, at the end of the day, most people are not going to watch it because it's not even on most people's radar.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they've. I mean, we talk about trying to loop this back in. We talked
Yeah,
about UWF never had that core base, and
yeah,
AEW has that, and they're never going anywhere. I mean, I know people that eat, sleep, live, and breathe AEW and won't watch anything WWE related.
correct.
Even NXT is evil Vince McMahon territory. It doesn't matter, how much truth there is to any of that. It's what people believe in, and they want, they want that new brand. They're fed up with WWE programming. I'm in that, on that bandwagon myself to an extent. Of just I've tuned out of WWE for a long time because it's not interesting, or it's all filler to me now. But
I've been on that bandwagon ever since I saw AEW Dynamite in Atlanta and ROH in Atlanta.
yeah, AEW is Atlanta show was the best one they've ever done, and that was like that kind of was the catalyst for me thinking that they really could do something with this, and they could get to 1 million viewers or 2 million viewers or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, so let's go back to Herb Abrams. Uh,
Oh, Herb.
the
Yeah,
death. Let's talk about the death. So I mean, we talked about it a little earlier. This guy died. He goes out. He's running around this hotel, uh, covered in nothing but cocaine and baby oil.
yeah.
Smashes into a door after breaking all the furniture with a baseball bat because he's running from the police.
You love that furniture breaking.
I do, man. That's just, hey, man. Hey, it's pro wrestling, dude. Like, people scream, "We want tables!" Like, there's just something about destroying furniture
Herb
that
innovating
appeals.
again,
Yeah,
innovating again.
yeah. It just appeals to wrestling people. Destroy that furniture, and so yeah, and so he slams into the door and ends up basically having a heart attack, and he, in police custody, and yeah, man. What do you guys think about the way he goes out here?
Well, it's interesting because I don't even know if we can call it a tragedy at this point because no one actually knows what happened. You get like
Mm,
15 different stories, and literally from every speaker they're like, I heard this happened. I heard, like, Marty Esberg said that he took his clothes off in the jail cell, had a seizure in the jail, and that's how he died, or something like that. Someone said it was because he ran into the door. Some people actually, no, it was Marty Esberg actually, who was just like, I question, like, he doesn't think the man is dead.
Yeah, there's just like almost like Tupac esque kind of
yeah.
like concept between some of these guys that he's not actually dead. That was really appealing to me that exists. I mean, I just thought that was kind of legendary.
And the fact that Marty said that a promoter told him that he saw Herb Abrams. That Herb Abrams came and said, "Hey man, you're using the UWF name. I need a check for that."
It's
I mean, that's part of being a legend, right? Like Herb Abrams didn't become a legend through positive things or merit, but I mean, it was definitely a bigger than life thing, which wrestling is always going to be attracted to. I think it's one of the things it suffers from now. I think there aren't larger than life personalities because we associate those kind of things with negativity, right? The boys aren't the pill popping cokeheads that they were in the past, and that's good. Like I'm glad that most of them are much more prone to go back to their hotel room and play video games. That's good from their health perspective, but from a performance rock star perspective, it's fucking lame as fuck. It's lame as shit. I honestly think it's one of the things when people contact me. I think one of the things they miss is because there were stories about me, right? I'm the guy who's going to grab the TV and throw it at you because you fucked up a fucking spot. Like, and of course, there's something about that that's really negative, but there's also something about that that's very fucking pro wrestling. And there's not a one like that nowadays. And I think that there's something kind of missing about that. Like, who's the fucking passionate trainer right now? Who's the guy that's going to knock your dick in the dirt if you're not doing something correctly to make sure that you're going to do it correctly? AR Fox, QT Marshall. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that they can't be good trainers. I'm just saying, like, the dynamic nature of this performance shit called pro wrestling is sorely lacking. I think it when you look at who the top guys are and who's running shit, there's something that's fascinating about guys that really live out on the edge. That there's some kind of romantic notion that we have about artists and performers, that there's a part of you that's got to live out on the edge. It's why we love biopics, right? It's why we do a biopic of Freddie Mercury and Elton John, but we don't do one of Donnie fucking Osmond or Neil Diamond. I don't care how many records Neil Diamond sells. I don't want to see that fucking story, right? I
Right.
want to see the guy that was like right on the edge and holy shit and AIDS during the AIDS epidemic, and that's they're mired in the culture as they influence the culture. And Herb Abrams, for good or bad, definitely was one of those guys that people could tell, the boys can tell stories about, and it's amazing. I mean, Todd Gordon did coke, right? Todd Gordon did a bunch of stuff, but at the end, he was boringly sensible at the same time, right? When ECW was still breaking even or turning a profit, Todd Gordon was in charge. But it's Heyman who will always be remembered, because
Right.
Heyman's the guy who's going to give you the locker room speech that's going to have you run through a brick wall. Heyman's the guy that's going to do the craziest shit. Heyman's the guy that's going to green light, yeah, do a crucifixion angle, and then I'll just deny everything. Heyman's the guy who's going to tell New Jack, go fucking cut that kid up, and then I'm going to lie for you in court to get you off. But at the end of the day, people still love New Jack and still love Heyman, even though they're pieces of shit, because they live bigger than life. And in wrestling, we're in desperate, desperate need of bigger than life characters. So,
And it even appeals outside of wrestling, right? Like everybody is into that sort of thing. There's not going to be a Dark Side of the Ring Kofi Kingston episode. It's going to be like, well, after he got done with his
yeah.
match, he went back to the room and played video games and recorded a podcast with his buddies. Roll credits, and that's the whole episode. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And nothing against Kofi Kingston; he's an amazing performer, but it's just it's that their character in the ring now is much more entertaining than they are out of the ring, and that wasn't the case in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
And when you look at the people who are bigger than life, right? It's The Rock, it's John Cena to a point. It's interesting to me who they have earmarked to get out of the wrestling business. Like, the two of them went to Becky Lynch and said, Rock is like, I'll introduce you to my agent. You need to get out of this shit, because they recognize there's something about her that's potentially bigger than life. And now, if you're a bigger than life personality, you go make your money outside of wrestling, not within it. And I find that really fascinating. Like, there was a time where it's like, oh, The Rock, we got to, keep doing this wrestling thing. You're bigger than life. But it's like, no, I've outgrown wrestling, because wrestling isn't about that anymore. And I don't know. Like, AEW, to me, they have to make one crossover star and have one truly engaging angle, and they'll be on their way. But if they don't make a crossover star, they're just going to be a really well-funded, good indie promotion, instead of a true competitor. Because you're a true competitor once someone from your organization shows up to host Saturday Night fucking Live, and they don't have that person yet, but they can make that person. And when that person shows up on Saturday Night Live, I mean, can you imagine hosted by Cody Rhodes? Of course you can't, right? But theoretically, assuming he wasn't kind of dumb, because he kind of is, but like Darby Allin, if eventually they made Darby Allin this darling that was really engaging, and they're like, oh, Darby Allin on the next, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, who's that larger than life figure right now? I'm not so sure they're out there, but wrestling's a lot better when we have them. So,
I mean, if I had to bet on somebody to be that person, it's probably Adam Page. Um, but I don't know if they'll, a lot of right decisions got to be made between now and then, from several different people to make that happen. And I could possibly see Cody doing it, but not like today. No, he would have to
No.
be,
And I
you
mean,
know,
Adam Page, where's he been, right? Like that's tough too. Is like, I mean, it's tough because it's like because when I throw that question out, the names I get kicked back are Adam Page and MJF, and I go, sure, possible, anybody's possible, but who's the one that really reaches through and engages? Who's the one that my kids are going to look at, having only a cursory knowledge or care about pro wrestling, and go, oh, okay,
Orange
you know,
Cassidy. I mean, pe- people sleep, and I have to touch on this. People sleep on Orange Cassidy, but he's selling more merch.
my kids care about Orange Cassidy and Darby Allin,
Yeah,
and any Japanese woman wrestler. That's it. That's
yeah,
that's who they look at when they look at AEW, because I force them to watch it, and that's the ones they go like, oh, okay, oh, Darby Allin, he was in that, because my kids saw the clip of Sammy Guevara and screwing around in the convenience store, so she saw that independent of me, and she's like, oh, that's the guy that does the coffin drop. I'm like, holy crap. And she goes, how come AEW doesn't do more of that stuff? That stuff I find cool. And I go, I don't know.
that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Like,
those shoes that they came out with for Orange Cassidy that would have the freshly squeezed on it, I guarantee you see somebody walking around in those. They look
yeah.
good, and like he's got that appeal where, when he came out with the T-shirt, it was like their best selling piece of merchandise.
My kids do the half thumbs up with that awkward smile to me, and it cracks me up to no end. They think that's hysterical. Like, what's cool is such a hard thing to grasp, but boy, when you've got it, you gotta freaking churn that machine out. I mean, if they didn't churn out the machine after Austin 316, where would they have been? You
Right.
got to recognize when the zeitgeist hits, and you have to be willing to pay through the nose for it too. I think that's one of the things that slows the WWE down. Is at the end of the day, they don't want to feel beholden to any of the talent, but pro wrestling is a talent driven business. It just is.
Yeah.
And um, ECW pretends like, oh no, we're going to make it about the brand. That way, when we lose people, we'll still be okay. But once they lost their top people, they weren't okay. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no way around the formula. It's entertainment business. I watch stars. I don't watch a brand. So like at the end, I have to be interested in the people that you're trying to emotionally engage me with. You're trying to put me under the ether. You're not going to put me under the ether constantly having unknowns. I don't care how good Austin Theory is at fake fighting. If I don't if I don't connect to him, and you don't force me to connect to him, and I don't find him engaging, you're going to get ratings in the 1.6 million instead of 3-4 million. I was like, think about that. When CM Punk was on top and they were bordering between 3 and 4 million, it was like panic button pushing time. Oh my God, we're below, we're in 3.6 million. What a colossal failure. We're in 1.7, 1.8. Oh my God. That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, they would have been firing people left and right if today's numbers had been even 5, 10 years ago. It's wild to think about.
Thunder got 2.5 million, and that was like, all right, it's getting time to cancel the show. Thunder.
Yeah.
Mm,
I never thought about it in that perspective. That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
hmm
Those Monday Night Wars ratings, man. I don't know that we'll ever get there again.
Hard to
Um,
imagine we will, but you
yeah.
know, unless they can start shit with the UFC.
Yeah. Right. Well, we gotta wrap this one up.
Oh yeah,
We've
man.
we've been on it here for a minute. So I want to get everybody's final thoughts on this. So Caleb, what's kind of your overall thoughts on this episode with Herb Abrams?
Well, again, like I said, to me, it was one of the best episodes that they've done of Dark Side of the Ring. Again, it's a fascinating story. Again, the thing that I take away from it is at the very end of the episode when they're talking about this guy who basically is a piece of shit. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. He was. but yet you had like I go back to Stevie Ray Wild thing in this. He's like, he saw something in me, that I didn't see in myself, and he gets very emotional talking about him. I mean, well, that's a salesperson for you. He sold himself to a lot of talent, and he got them to buy in and stuff like that. It's a fascinating story. The one thing to me, one of the things that a promoter says that can be the downfall of anything is, yeah, I want to put the WWE out of business. I'm like, well, you're not going to. That's never going to happen. The only way WWE is going to go out of business is if Vince McMahon goes, yeah, we're done. That's it. That's it. Like, so anytime you try that, you're going to fail. If that is your main goal, you're going to fail. And that seemed to be what his goal was. But again, also what I took away from the episode as well was that even though it was failing, he didn't seem to bother him. It seemed like, hey, the party goes on. Like they even said it. They're like, yeah, you drew 200 people to the MGM Grand Arena and stuff like that. He's like, yeah, but it's the MGM Grand. And they're like, yes, and you didn't sell it, so it was a failure. But just a very interesting story. And after seeing this, and after listening to you guys, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is where they talk about all of those promoters that do this kind of thing in wrestling. So
Yeah.
But Steve, what about you, man? What's your kind of wrap up conclusion on this?
Um, that it comes down in wrestling, um, ambition in pro wrestling and logic make terrible dance partners. Um, that for every person that says, yeah, but we're gonna approach this wrestling thing to make money, and it's this logical enterprise. I always said me and Bill Behrens were like opposite sides of the spectrum. That he thought wrestling was science, and I thought it was art, and the truth is somewhere in between. But anytime you have to do this balancing act of to get involved in pro wrestling and think that you're going to be able to eke out a decent living is completely irrational. And it requires this sort of mentality of tunnel vision and thought. And you're going to get the craziest people involved in this thing. And I just love that they had the example of one of the craziest, and that's Herb Abrams. But it does sort of allude to the fact that this business in pro wrestling is going to attract fucking wackadoos, which gives me hope because that means it's still outlaw enough. There's still room to wiggle and move. That I think that's what causes all of this ambition and all of these dreams. But a lot of times those dreams are just going to come crashing down. And that interplay between those things is what makes wrestling still fascinating to me to this day, even though there's no way I should continue to be involved in it, but I just can't resist. So, and the Herb Abrams are as big a part of the wrestling DNA as the Ric Flairs and the Vince McMahons. They're all part of this fabric, even though we want to live in denial of it. There's a lot more Herb Abrams than there are Vince McMahons. And there's a big part of Herb Abram in Vince McMahon too, whether we want to admit it or not.
oh
Yeah, that was gonna be my thing. It's like it's Herb Abrams definitely. There's definitely aspects of Vince in Herb Abrams and vice versa. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, Steve, thanks for being on the show, man.
Oh, thank you
It's been a
guys.
great episode. Tell everybody where they can hear more of you.
Oh, the best place is either Georgia Wrestling History, or I got a podcast we do every other Tuesday called Tipping Point, and then my YouTube channel. So Stephen Platinum, Stephen Platinum. Just do a search on that, and God knows I put the content out there, and I'm going to do it even more now. So God help us all. But yeah, check me out there and enjoy this episode of this. I think it's great that you're covering Dark Side of the Ring. I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, you were kind of one of the first people to check out this show and kind of put us over. And I know that we definitely gained some listeners from that. So, definitely thanks for that and thanks for being on, for sure. And
Absolutely.
always, Caleb, tell everybody where they can check out Stovall Wrestling Network.
You can find it wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, the works. You can find them, and also add us on Facebook, SWN Stovall Wrestling Network. You can find us on Facebook, and we'll get interactive and stuff like that. And just check us out, because we discuss everything pro wrestling, not just, dark side of the ring or whatnot, but we discuss the news going on currently, and then we talk about past and possibly what the future could hold. So,
Right
All
on.
right. Well, thanks everyone. This has been an Evolved Review.
Right on.